DIY Transvestigation. Everything you need to know about the human anatomy to do your very own thorough transvestigations. Just a quick disclaimer that I think that anybody who wants to transition their gender who is fully consenting should be able to do so with all the resources and support that they need, and to be able to do that in peace. When we do transvestigations, we're looking at mainly celebrities who are presenting themselves as a gender that they're not, in order to deceive and confuse humanity. Now, the skeleton. There are differences in the structure between the male and the female skeletons once they mature, and these can't be changed with hormones or anything like that. You can change a little bit with some surgery, but generally the features of the skeleton that are designed for bearing children in females and for upper body strength and easy movement in males are hardwired and programmed into the DNA, and they can't be changed by hormones. So this is the thing that you can look for when you're doing transvestigations. When I say FTM, I'm talking about female to male transgenders, and when I say MTF, I'm talking about male to female transgenders. So the skull. This is a male skull and this is a female skull. Generally, males have a larger skull because they have a larger body, and their skulls are normally thicker too, so that they can survive blows to the head and things like that. Males have a slanted brow and females have a more of a vertical brow. There are differences in people from different ethnicities and things like that, so it's not always definitive. There are men with more vertical brows and women with more slanted brows. Men normally have more of a brow ridge, which is the bone here, and women have less of a brow ridge. This is another, for fighting and things like that. It protects your eyes. Men have a longer skull and women tend to have a more rounded skull. This is referring to the hairline, but women normally have a widow's peak and men don't. It's not to say that men can't and that women always do, but this is a feature that tends to be more of a female feature, having a widow's peak. Men have bigger ears, women have generally smaller ears, and men tend to have a more gaunt face because they have all these sort of jutting bones in their face, and they don't have as much subcutaneous fat as women do, and so their faces tend to look sort of more drawn and gaunt, whereas women have finer bones and less prominence in their bones, and they've got more subcutaneous fat, making them look softer. Men have high prominent cheekbones, whereas women don't really have as high or prominent cheekbones. And again, this is, related to genetics as well, but normally you see these big, high cheekbones in men. The mouth and the jaw. So males have a wide dental arch, whereas females have more of a smaller dental arch. So a male dental arch might sort of look like that, whereas a female dental arch would be a bit more like that. Males tend to have a more squared off chin, like this, a more squared off jaw, whereas women have sort of a rounded, more pointed jaw. Men have a bigger mouth, there's a bigger skull to stretch it across, and women have a smaller mouth. In general, often there's more distance between the nose and the top lip in males than there is in females, because they've got more space to spread their features around. And males tend to have their top lip being narrower than their bottom lip, whereas in females, their top lip and their bottom lip are about the same. Again, this is not for everybody, but when you're doing transvestigations, you're building up a picture of somebody. When you're looking at somebody's eyes, so in general, males have bigger features and women have smaller features. And men have bigger eyes and females have smaller eyes because there's less space for the eyes on the female skull, and there's more space in the male skull. And male eyes are further apart, whereas women's eyes are more kind of closer together. And men have often longer, thicker lashes, whereas women have shorter, more sparse lashes. Women can have long lashes, but generally they're not as thick as male lashes. And women tend to have a more gentle, inviting, nurturing gaze, whereas men's gaze are more intense or confronting. So these are just two pictures of normal people, and you can see that the male, the look in his eye is intense and sort of projecting outwards, whereas the female eye is sort of gentle and sort of draws you inwards. Now with FTM, so female to male transgenders, often they have sort of, you can sometimes see one droopy eye, and this can be caused by testosterone abuse. See, the eye is a bit droopy on this side. It tends to be the left eye. Testosterone can grow the nose and the chin, especially if it's taken before puberty, so you don't develop the secondary sex characteristics of your biological sex. And lots of these people who have been transgendered have been done so in their androgynous cults and it's happened to them pre-puberty. Facial hair can sometimes hide some of the more feminine features. And you can get brow and chin and jaw implants. So here's a picture of somebody before their jaw implant and after their jaw implant. They sort of glue some of this stuff into the jaw to create more of a angled jaw. With MTFs, however, we've actually been programmed to see these really large male features as female, because you can't really, it's harder to shave down parts of a skull than it is to sort of build it up. But these big eyes that are widely spaced, this big mouth and big nose and this square angular chin with this long neck, these are all male features, and this big ear. Whereas really females look more like this, with a more rounded face, with a pointier chin, with lips that are a bit more smaller and even sized, less space between the nose and the chin, smaller eyes, and this person's wearing makeup, but smaller, less dense eyelashes, with a shorter neck. So this is actually what the female proportions and what females actually do look like. You can shave down bones, and lots of MTFs have had this done. You can look at them. So this is before the bone shave, and this is after. You can see where the chin is, and then this little sort of dent there, because you can't shave all the way back here, because this is where the muscle attaches your jaw to your skull. If you didn't have this muscle, you wouldn't be able to talk or chew. So they can't shave it all the way down, but they can sort of do a little bit of shave there. So when you look at some of these people side on, it looks, yeah, quite odd. Looking at the neck, everybody has an Adam's apple. So this is the larynx. You can't look at a woman and, you know, scream she's a dude because she's got an Adam's apple. Everybody has one. So this is your larynx. Everybody has this, and this is a little notch on the end, and that's what forms the Adam's apple. And this, your vocal cords lay in here, and you've got two vocal cords, and in men they're longer, so the Adam's apple comes out more, and in women they're shorter, so it's normally hidden in the neck a little bit more. So if you think about it in terms of like a harp, so pretend this is the male vocal cord and this is the female vocal cord. Because these are longer and normally thicker, they resonate more deeply, and you have a deep booming voice, but here they're shorter and often thinner, so you have a higher, more high-pitched voice. So men have a bigger larynx and women have a smaller larynx. Men have less subcutaneous fat, so it's harder to hide this notch in their neck because it's not covered by as much fat as it is in women. And men normally have a bigger trachea, which is where the air goes down here, and women have a narrower trachea, and this is, you know, because they've got bigger lungs and to have better airflow when they're doing because they're built for athleticism. And men normally have a longer neck, whereas women have a shorter neck. So if you've got a longer neck, there's more room for this to kind of bulge outwards, whereas in women sometimes it's kind of hidden up here under the chin. But if you put your fingers on your neck and swallow, you can feel your larynx bob up and down, and that's your Adam's apple. If you're a woman, if you're a man, you can usually see it. FTM, so transgendered men can get implants, and testosterone can actually cause this, if it's taken especially prepubescently, can cause this to actually grow like a man's larynx would. And for MTFs, you can actually get a tracheal shave where you kind of shave down this bit. These people go through a lot of surgery. So looking now at shoulders. The male shoulders, you can only fit 3 heads on here because they're wider, but on a female shoulder you can kind of fit 2.5 heads. Males have broader shoulders, females have narrower shoulders. Men tend to have shoulders that are straighter across, and women have shoulders that are little bit more sloping. Men can have sloping shoulders too, and women can have straighter across shoulders, but generally their skeletons are sloping if you're a female and straighter if you're a male. If a man works this trapezius muscle out a lot, then it can look like he's got sloping shoulders, but it kind of slopes there and sort of goes straight out again. Men have a straighter collarbone, sort of goes straight across, and women have a more curved collarbone. So you can see it's not, it sort of pops out there and kind of curves in a little bit. You can see that these bones are finer too. Males have shoulders that are wider than their hips, and females have hips that are about the same width as their shoulders. Men have thicker bones, and you can see them, and women have finer bones. And men tend to have these sort of jutting bones if they're thin, out like this, whereas women can be very thin and still not get this jutting happening. You can see that in the shoulders that this jutting bone here is quite large in men, where in women it's quite small, and it's hidden under a lot of subcutaneous fat here. Whereas in men, if they're thin enough here, you can really see it. It becomes much more prominent. But women have to be really thin to get this look. So if you see, you do see it on a lot of celebrities that are MTF, this really thick jutting collarbone that is, you know, coveted by people. But it's actually impossible really to get unless you are born a male and have transgendered. I did have a little bit of a look into it, and it looks like you can get implants here. So yeah, that's interesting too. So the rib cage in males is wider than it is in females. It sort of goes around like this, and in males it sort of tends to jut out more. Men have a longer rib cage, it comes down further, and women have a shorter rib cage, it comes to here. Men obviously have thicker bones and women have thinner bones. Men have a straighter torso because this rib cage comes to here, and then the hips are there, so they sort of go straight down, whereas women, it kind of curves in a bit and stops up higher, so that's where you get the waist, because there's no bone there, so it's sort of, the flesh kind of comes in and then comes back out again over these bones. Even if you don't have an hourglass shape, that's the shape of your skeleton. Some women are a bit more straight up and down, but that's generally how a female skeleton looks. I just want to show you this too. This really thin man, I mean, and this is quite a disturbing picture really, but this is what idolizing celebrities in the fashion industry and whatever else does to people. You can still see that this is a male because of his big rib cage, even though he's very thin. You're not going to mistake this person for a female. And same again with this person, who she is very thin, but you can see her tiny rib cage, and you can still see her hips here. That doesn't go away just because you lose weight. And even her collarbone, women have to be extremely thin, and even then they don't get that jutting collarbone at the top of their shoulder. This guy's not FTM, but men tend to have kind of square pecs, even if they're not very trimmed. But you can see FTMs, they have a sort of pillowy, odd-shaped pecs, because women have a lot of trouble developing pectoral muscles because that's not what we're designed for. If you want, you can get some of your ribs removed. It doesn't matter about your internal organs at all, but you can see some celebrity MTFs have had that done to create more of a high waist. But you can't get rid of all your ribs because all your internal organs are in there. The back is a really important part of looking to see if someone's been transgendered or not, because men have a straight spine. It kind of goes straight up and down. And women have a curved spine. Even though these people you're straight on, you can see how this woman's spine goes into her body and comes out again. So you can see that sort of dent there. And you can also see her higher waist here and his lower waist here that kind of goes straight down, and her waist goes in and flares back out again. And from the side you can see pretty straight down to this, little bottom there. Straight down spine. And from the side you can see her spine curves. So you can see the curve here as well. The curve is up higher, whereas men it's, you know, starts down lower just before the bottom gets there, but it goes in and then kind of comes out again. And men don't have a pelvic tilt, so it just sort of goes straight up and down, whereas women, their pelvis sort of tilts forward like this. So these lines are sort of parallel with each other. And these are really important because this spinal arch and this pelvic tilt helped support the weight of the baby when you're pregnant. So if you didn't have this spinal arch and you had all this weight on the front, you wouldn't be able to walk. And I find it hilarious when MTF celebrities are parading themselves around as pregnant with this really straight male back and then this just massive bump on the front. Their bodies wouldn't be able to move like that. So, you know, it's obviously some kind of prosthetic that they're wearing. The pelvis. So males have their pelvis that are narrower than their shoulder joint. So here's a shoulder joint, and if you go all the way down to the widest part here, you can see that it's narrower. And here on the females, there's a joint, and you can see it's kind of about the same width. So on women, their hips are kind of the same width as their shoulders. Again, some women are more muscular up the top, but they still have these, you know, birthing hips. Women have the waist indent above the navel because that's where their ribs end, and so it's really just the rib cage keeping their shape. If you didn't have a skeleton, you'd just be jelly on the floor. But it curves in there and then curves back out because it's going over the bones. And men have a longer rib cage, so it doesn't really curve in as much, and it's sort of at the belly button level. And men have narrower hips because they're made for easy walking and forward locomotion, whereas women have wider hips made for birthing, which makes walking very difficult for women in terms of their, you know, structure. We're not really built for walking around the way men are. If MTFs are given estrogen, especially prepubescently, they can grow fat around here, and they can get implants and they can wear padding. So sometimes it's hard, you know, to tell because it looks pretty convincing. And some of the younger MTFs who are sort of early 20s, they're really, you know, sort of have it down to a fine art, and they're very difficult to spot. The Q angle, you hear the Q angle all the time. So this is the male pelvis and a female pelvis. This is where the legs go into the male pelvis, and this is where it goes down to the knee. So there is a Q angle in men, but it's just not as much of a Q angle as it is in women. So it goes down like this. So the legs kind of look straight. Whereas in women, the pelvis is so wide that legs go in here and they have to come all the way back down here so that you can actually have some balance and you can walk. So the reason that women have a Q angle is so that they can actually walk. If their legs went straight down like a man's, you wouldn't really, you'd sort of waddle side to side. Men sort of have bonier knees, maybe not this guy, and women have softer looking knees. Men have a smaller Q angle, and women have more of a Q angle. Men sort of have a straight down legs. You can see this is a man. The waist kind of comes in at this belly button level, and then just nothing. It's just all down. This is a woman, obviously, because her waist comes in above the belly button level, well and truly, and then goes all the way out until just below the crotch, and then comes down in this Q angle where it meets the floor. And women tend to have more roundness on the legs. I mean, this woman is not large by any means, and she's got, you know, that little thigh gap, but this kind of the idea of the thigh gap too, you really have to be an MTF to get the thigh gap that everybody talks about. On FTMs, when they're trying to disguise this Q angle, they do this sort of weird skating walk where they put their knee out and then they angle it back in again, and they angle out their foot so they kind of look like they're ice skating along. It must be a really uncomfortable way to walk, but it kind of disguises this Q angle so you look less feminine, I guess. And women, and MTFs do this more of a catwalk, so they cross the legs over so that the eye is a bit more deceived and you can kind of see more of a Q angle, but this Q angle is happening because they're crossing their legs over. And this looks like there might be an MTF, possibly. Their legs would definitely go straight down if they weren't crossing them over. And this is a FTM, and he's got his hands in his pockets too. So that MTFs and FTMs put their hands in the pockets a lot to disguise the width of the hips and to disguise that there aren't any hips. Arms. So men have arms where they're longer arms, so the wrist kind of reaches crotch level, whereas women have shorter arms and their palm sort of reaches crotch level. The wrists are higher, so women have shorter arms, men have longer arms generally. Men have a longer humerus bone, whereas women's humerus bones are shorter, and bending here, good for holding babies, etc. Men sort of have this kind of pointy, jutty, outy elbow, whereas women have sort of a more rounded elbow. And men tend to hold their arms straight down because they don't have any hips that they're going to bang into when they're walking. But women, she's holding her arms kind of downwards, but women kind of angle their arms out when they're walking to avoid hitting the hips. If she walked like that, she would be bashing into her hips. FTMs, because their arms angle upwards, sometimes they kind of bend their arm again down at the elbow so that it looks a bit straighter. It looks a bit weird, but that's another FTM trick that they use. Their hands and the feet. Males tend to have bigger hands and feet, and women have smaller hands and feet. Men have bigger wrist bones and women have smaller wrist bones. Men have more bony ankles and women have sort of more smooth line between the calf and the ankle, and men look a bit more sinewy. This is a male digit ratio, so males normally have a longer ring finger compared with their index finger, and females normally have a longer index finger compared with their ring finger. Now this is pretty much, most men would have this, but lots of women have this, but then lots of women also have it like this. It's very rare to see this on a biological man, but it's quite common to see this on a biological woman, so you can't just look at the hands and just determine that they've been transgendered because they've got a different digit ratio. You have to kind of look at the whole person. And remember that you have to look at lots of different pictures in lots of different ways. And that lots of these people that we're talking about have been transgendered pre-puberty by their families who are involved in these satanic religious cults. And so some of this, abuse that these people have been subjected to has been quite horrific. And oftentimes they continue the tradition with their own children. Just remember that the difference between male and female skeletons is related to, reproduction and survival. And hormones can change the flesh, but the skeleton will remain the same. Thanks for watching.